Να ξεκινήσω, κύριε Πρίτα. Καλησπέρα σας. Την τελετή Αναγόρευσης, Επίτιμο Διδάκτορα του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Φιλοσοφίας της Επιστήμης, του κυρίου Μαρτίν Καριέρ, καθηγητή Φιλοσοφία της Επιστήμης στο Πανεπιστήμιο Bielefeld της Γερμανίας, θα προσφωνήσει ο πρίτανης του Εθνικού και Καποδιστριακού Πανεπιστημίου Αθηνών, καθηγητής Γεράσιμος Χιάσος.
Αξιότιμη κυρία Αντιπρίτανη, κυρία Σοφία Παπαϊωάννου, αξιότιμε κύριε Κοσμήτορα της Σχολής Θετικών Επιστημών, κύριε Παρμακέλη, αξιότιμε κύριε Πρόεδρε του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Φιλοσοφίας της Επιστήμης, κύριε Χατζημοϊσή, αγαπητές και αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, κυρίες και κύριοι. Το Εθνικό και Καποδιστριακό Πανεπιστήμιο Αθηνών έχει σήμερα την εξαιρετική τιμή να απονείμει τον τίτλο του Επίτιμου Διδάκτορα του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Φιλοσοφίας της Επιστήμης της Σχολής Θετικών Επιστημών στον κύριο Μάρτιν Καριέρ, καθηγητή Φιλοσοφίας της Επιστήμης του Πανεπιστημίου του Bielefeld στη Γερμανία. Με τη διάκριση αυτή, το πρώτο και μεγαλύτερο πανεπιστήμιο της χώρας τιμά κατά τα ακαδημαϊκά ιωθώτα, με την προσήκουσα επισημότητα μια εξέχουσα προσωπικότητα της σύγχρονης φιλοσοφίας, με πλούσιο και διεθνώς αναγνωρισμένο έργο. Η διεθνής αναγνώριση του καθηγητή Καριέρ επιβεβαιώνεται από τις πολυάριθμες διακρίσεις και βραβεύσεις, καθώς και από τη συμμετοχή του σε διεθνή ακαδημαϊκά και επιστημονικά δίκτυα. Η επιστημονική του πορεία χαρακτηρίζεται από σημαντικές έρευνες σε κέριους τομείς. Η συμβολή του στη μελέτη της δυναμικής εξέλιξης των επιστημονικών θεωριών και στη διασύνδεση της φιλοσοφίας με την πρακτική και εφαρμοσμένη επιστημονική έρευνα είναι καθοριστική. Κεντρική αρχή του φιλοσοφικού έργου του τιμόμενου είναι ότι η φιλοσοφία, είτε ως θεωρητική ενασχόληση, είτε ως πρακτική, οφείλει στο σύγχρονο κόσμο να βρίσκεται σε διαρκή διάλογο με την επιστήμη. Η επιστήμη, ορισμένη ως γνωστική δραστηριότητα με διυποκειμενική ισχύ, αποτελεί ένα δυναμικό φαινόμενο εξελικτικού χαρακτήρα. Αποτελεί δηλαδή το αντίθετο της δογματικής τάσης, την αδιάκοπη αναζήτηση και αναθεώρηση της γνώσης μας για τον κόσμο που ζούμε. Αυτή η διαρκής αναζήτηση και αναθεώρηση ανατροφοδοτεί το φιλοσοφικό στογασμό, καθιστά συχνά παροχημένες φιλοσοφικές αντιλήψεις που επικρατούσαν ακόμα και για αιώνες και θέτει με διαφορετικό τρόπο παλιά ερωτήματα που η φιλοσοφία καλείται να συζητήσει και ενδεχομένως να απαντήσει. Η σημερινή απονομή του τίτλου του Επίτιμου Διδάκτορος στον καθηγητή Μάρτιν Καριέρ γίνεται ως ένδειξη αναγνώρισης της καθοριστικής συμβολής του στο πεδίο της φιλοσοφίας της επιστήμης και στην ανάδειξη των ποικίλων τρόπων που η φιλοσοφία και η επιστήμη αλληλεπιδρούν. Ο διακεκριμένος καθηγητής θεωρητικής φιλοσοφίας του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Φιλοσοφίας της Επιστήμης του Πανεπιστημίου μας, κύριος Χρυσόστομος Ματζαβίνος, που θα ακολουθήσει στο βήμα, θα αναφερθεί εκτενέστερα στο πραγματικά πολύ μεγάλο έργο του τιμόμενου και θα μας δώσει ενεργέστερη εικόνα για έναν διεθνώς καταξιωμένο επιστήμονα. Dear Professor Carrier, on behalf of the Rectory Authorities of the National Kapodistrian University of Athens, I would like to express our sincere congratulations. It's a great honor for the academic community of the National Kapodistrian University of Athens to welcome you to our institution. We are proud to acknowledge your contribution to science and to society, and deeply grateful to be inspired by your work. We wish you all the best in the progress of your scientific work and all your future endeavors. Congratulations.
Παρουσίαση του έργου και της προσωπικότητας του τιμωμένου καθηγητή από τον καθηγητή Θεωρητικής Φιλοσοφίας του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Φιλοσοφίας της Επιστήμης του Πανεπιστημίου Αθηνών, κύριο Χρυσόστομο Ματζαβίνο.
Dear Rector of the University, dear Dean of the School of Science, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the Department of History and Philosophy of Science of the University of Athens has the great honor to award today the title of the Doctor Honoris Causa to Martin Carrier, Professor of Philosophy of Science at the University of Bielefeld. With this distinction, the oldest university in our country honors an exceptional figure of contemporary philosophy. This distinction is awarded as an homage and a recognition of moral debt to exceptional men of letters and science and to exceptional figures of public life for their contribution to the endless project of the creation of a cultural order. In this spirit, the honorary doctorate is awarded today in recognition of the crucial contribution of Professor Carrier to the field of philosophy of science. Please allow me, in the name of the honoring department, to present briefly the personality and the principal academic achievements of the awardee. Before taking up his professorship in Bielefeld in 1998, Professor Carrier held the chair of philosophy of science at the University of Heidelberg from 1994 to 1998, and his wide-ranging work has established him as a leading figure in the philosophy of science in Germany and one of the most important philosophers of science internationally. He has been an ordinary member of the German National Academy of Sciences Leopoldina since 2000 and an ordinary member of the Berlin-Brandenburgische Akademie der Wissenschaften and the Akademie der Wissenschaften und der Literatur, Mainz. He is also an ordinary member of the Academia Europaea, the European Academy of Sciences, and the Académie Internationale de Philosophie des Sciences. He was awarded the Leibniz Prize in 2008 by the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, which is considered the most important prize in German-speaking academia. He has also been awarded the Blaise Pascal Medal and the Werner Heisenberg Medal. The opus of Professor Carrier is extremely extended and includes contributions to many fields. I will restrict myself exclusively to the presentation of two thematic fields of his work: the productive synthesis of history and philosophy of science on the one hand, and the analysis of the role of values in science on the other. Professor Carrier has showed particular interest in the possibility of synthesizing philosophy of science and history of science already in the 90s, and thus pioneered the emergence of what is now called integrated history and philosophy of science. A constant inspiration of his own work has been the work of Thomas Kuhn, who has also been an honorary doctor of our department. Let me remind you the opening phrase of the classic The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. History, if viewed as a repository for more than anecdote or chronology, could provide a decisive transformation in the image of science by which we are now possessed. Martin Carrier has honored this proposal by constructing a philosophy of science which is constantly aware of the historical character of all scientific endeavors. Rather than focusing exclusively on algorithmic rules, which can supposedly provide somehow neutral theory choices among the alternatives on offer, he has been constantly stressing the historicity of all such choices. The scientific techniques used to bear evidence on theoretical constructs evolve over time. New scientific techniques are invented, elaborated, and transferred, often to areas where no one could originally preview that they could be used. The most obvious and celebrated case of a new scientific technique is, of course, experimentation. In contrast to medieval Aristotelianism, experimentation was introduced as a novel way to gain knowledge during the scientific revolution. In the former framework, experimental intervention was regarded as a distortion of the natural course of events and seemed unsuitable to be used to gain access to the mysteries of nature. As Professor Carrier notes in one of his notable papers, this is a quote, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's criticism of Newtonian optics proceeded along the same lines. Goethe reproached Newton's experiments for forcing nature to respond in contrived ways so that scientists are misled in their interpretation. Experimentation is tantamount to torturing nature with the result that she gives deceptive answers. In order to obtain significant and trustworthy evidence about nature, she must be allowed to speak unconstrained." End of quote. The main position of Carrier is that the provision of careful historical studies is constitutive of all work in philosophy of science. In other words, the analysis of the historical context must go hand in hand with the application of methodological rules. Since literally every single methodological rule must be applied, the focus should not be on algorithms and calculation, but rather on scientific discourse and reasonable decisions. It is simply untenable to equate calculation with scientific rationality, and it is an impossible demand to require that scientific judgments about which hypothesis should be accepted are to be the outcome of essentially atemporal calculations. The second field of research of Professor Carrier, to which I would like to refer now, is the broad field of analysis of the role of values in science and the position of science in a democratic polity. I cannot stress enough the admirable breadth and the general importance of his philosophical work for the promotion of the achievements of modern science in the public sphere. At a time when science, despite its indisputable contribution to society, continues to be attacked amidst irrationalist excesses and unjustified pressures from a variety of vested interests, Martin Carrier's courageous and sober defense of science is an example of a flourishing philosophical spirit. The main thrust of the argument of a series of path-breaking contributions of the awardee is that science is and should remain the main source of impartial knowledge. The stock of scientific knowledge can in principle be used by any interested agent to further whatever aims this agent tries to accomplish in any area of life, politics, markets, or arts, exactly because of its universal characteristics. In light of this view of science as the stock of the most reliable set of beliefs in a society, indeed the only stock of beliefs that deserves to be called knowledge, Carrier asks the question, what does good scientific policy advice look like? In tackling this question, he asks us to recall the predicament we are in. On the one hand, science is an epistemic endeavor and has no authority to make non-epistemic value judgments. Moreover, making such judgments infringes on the privilege of every single citizen in a democratic polity to choose how the priorities should be set and how society and economy should be organized. On the other hand, experts need to include policy-relevant values so as to structure the conceptual field at hand and give politicians a handle on the choices open to them. This means that, prima facie, good scientific policy advice can hardly avoid value judgments. Yet, according to Carrier, and this is a quote, there is a path in between. The first step is to distinguish between promoting and presupposing a non-epistemic goal like freedom, justice, security, or economic efficiency. It is one thing to commit oneself to a social objective and a completely different thing to set such a goal as a hypothetical condition. Presupposing evaluations means to state them explicitly as a separate premise. Expert advice is conditionalized and such that if certain goals were set, they could be accomplished by certain measures. Presupposing a value is not tantamount to committing oneself to this value. End of quote. In other words, when causal relationships are established, a technological transformation for practical purposes into the form of hypothetical imperatives is possible. This proposal is in the Max Weber, Karl Popper, Hans Albert tradition. Factual statements can be turned with the appropriate logical transformation to technological systems which indicate the appropriate means of intervention in the natural and social world. If a scientific finding establishes a relationship between two phenomena of the type, every time that A occurs, then B occurs, then, if for practical purposes we want B to emerge, we have only to create the conditions for the appearance of A. Take the case of the quantity theory of money in economics, according to which the general price level of goods and services is proportional to the money supply in an economy, when the level of real output and the velocity of money are constant. Suppose that we want to use the quantity theory of money for practical purposes. The statement, every time the money supply increases in an economy, inflation increases proportionally, can be transformed into the equivalent statement. If one wants to reduce inflation, then one has to reduce money supply. The actual decision is, of course, a political decision, where a great array of values will play a role, but scientific agents need not make them qua-scientific agents. No scientist is forced to make any political decision. As Carrier emphasizes, I quote, the non-committal stance regarding non-epistemic values suggests drawing up alternative, value-laden policy packages which combine facts, scientific accounts, and non-epistemic premises. Along these lines, advisors can elaborate a plurality of policy packages and tag them with provisions that express a non-committal attitude to their non-epistemic objectives. That is, such arrays may each employ a broad range of different political, economic, or moral preferences. A set of different means-ends scenarios may be conceived, each of which is structured by non-epistemic values. This solution respects the ideal of value freedom in science. Carrier warns us against being too quick in introducing political, social, economic, and other kinds of non-epistemic values uncritically into science. In his words, the trouble with giving up with value freedom is that committing science to certain non-epistemic goals is liable to produce a politicized and biased science that would cease to be the ecumenical source of knowledge on which all parties at strife can rely. This would rather fuel public suspicion that experts are hired guns and can be rented to fight for a political cause. This is analytical philosophy at its best. A hard philosophical problem is solved by providing and elaborating in a very delicate way on an important distinction. Besides, it documents the ingenuity and creativity of the author. Science can be valuable to society, remaining itself value-free. This fruitfulness in his way of thinking manifests itself also in a series of other fields, which, in the interest of time, I cannot present today. Sehr geehrter Herr Professor Carrier, die Universität Athen verleiht Ihnen heute den Doktortitel Honoris Causa in Anerkennung des ökumenischen Wertes Ihrer Philosophie, der sich in Ihrem Beitrag zur Gestaltung der zeitgenössischen theoretischen Philosophie manifestiert. Diese einzigartige Leistung war nur durch die Ausübung Ihrer Kreativität in fast allen Bereichen der philosophischen Forschung möglich. Einer Kreativität, die auf einer Grundlage harter intellektueller Arbeit beruht. Ihre außergewöhnlichen synthetischen Fähigkeiten, die wahrscheinlich die knappste Ressource auf dieser Welt sind, zusammen mit ihrer philosophischen Pädie, die sie sich in einem langen, fruchtbaren akademischen Leben angeeignet haben, haben sie in die Lage versetzt, eine Philosophie zu liefern, die das Leben der Menschen verbessern kann. Wir anerkennen heute ihre großen Verdienste um die Verteidigung der Vernunft in oft vernunftfeindlichen und vernunftwidrigen Zeiten. Sie betreten heute einen heimischen Boden, denn dieses Land ist das Geburtsland des Logos, dem Sie mit all Ihren schöpferischen Kräften gedient haben und immer noch unermüdlich dienen. Wir empfangen Sie deshalb in Athen, mit Ehrerbietung und Freude als Mitglied unserer akademischen Gemeinde und sagen Ihnen von Herzen: Willkommen in Ihrer geistigen Heimat.
Αναγόρευση του τιμωμένου. Ανάγνωση των κειμένων του ψηφίσματος του Τμήματος, της Αναγόρευσης και του Διδακτορικού Διπλώματος από τον Πρόεδρο του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Φιλοσοφίας της Επιστήμης, Καθηγητή Αντώνιο Χατζημοϊσή.
Εθνικών και Καποδιστριακών Πανεπιστήμιων Αθηνών. Ψήφισμα του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Φιλοσοφίας της Επιστήμης της των Θετικών Επιστημών Σχολής. Πριτανεύοντος εν το Αθήνησιν Εθνικό και Καποδιστριακό Πανεπιστημίο Γερασίμου Σιάσου, κοσμητεύοντος εν τη των Θετικών Επιστημών Σχολή Αριστίδου Παρμακέλη, προεδρεύοντος εν το Τμήμα της Ιστορίας και Φιλοσοφίας της Επιστήμης Αντωνίου Χατζημοϊσή, έδοξεν ομοφόνος το τμήματι Μάρτιν Καριέρ, άνδρα εύτε πεφικότα και παιδείας πλέον, εκ Γερμανίας ορμηθέντα, τας περί την φιλοσοφίαν της επιστήμης σπουδάς μάλα προαγαγόντα και αρτιώσαντα, πολλές δε και καινοτόμοι συγγραφές εν της ομοτέχνης διαλάμψαντα και παμπόλους μαθητάς διδάξαντα, έγλην ζηλωτήν κτισάμενον και επένων αγλαών εν τε τη εαυτού και εν τη ξένη αξιοθέντα, προσδετούτης της έλυσιν αή την εύνοιαν αυτού πολλαχή επιδειξάμενον, αυτόν τε ενέσε και επίτιμον διδάκτορα του τμήματος αναδείξε, το δε ψήφισμα τόδε μεμβράνην αναγράψε και τον του τμήματος πρόεδρον δημοσία, εν τη εθούση τη μεγάλη αναγνώντα και τα στιμάς ανυπώντα, επιδούνε αυτό, ή αν ημέρα η αναγόρευσης γένεται, καθάν ενόμιστε. Εγένετο, Αθήνηση, μηνός Οκτωβρίου 10, έτους Τετάρτου και 20, και δυσχυλιοστού από Χριστού γενέσεως. Ο Πρόεδρος του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Φιλοσοφίας της Επιστήμης, Αντώνιος Χατζημοϊσής. Αναγόρευσης. Επειδή υπέρ το Τμήμα Ιστορίας και Φιλοσοφίας της Επιστήμης των Θετικών Επιστημών Σχολής του Αθήνησιν Εθνικού και Καποδιστριακού Πανεπιστημίου, Μάρτιν Καριέρ, άξιον απέφθινε του Επιτίμου Διδακτορικού Αξιώματος, η δε των Θετικών Επιστημών Σχολή, τούτα παιδέξατο και ο πρίτανης τη της σχολής γνώμη επινεύει, δια τούτου εγώ, Αντώνιος Χατζημοϊσής, καθηγητής της συγχρόνου φιλοσοφίας, νυν δε του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Φιλοσοφίας της Επιστήμης Πρόεδρος, χρώμενος τη δυνάμει ειν παρά των πανεπιστημιακών νόμων και του Τμήματος έχω λαβών, Μάρτιν Καριέρ, επίτιμον διδάκτορα του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Φιλοσοφίας της Επιστήμης της των Θετικών Επιστημών Σχολής του Αθήνησιν Εθνικού και Καποδιστριακού Πανεπιστημίου δημοσία αναγορεύω και πάσας αυτότας προνομίας τας το πανεπιστημιακό τούτο αξιώματι παρεπομένας απονέμω. Εγένετο, Αθήνηση, μηνός Μαρτίου 20, έτους 5ου και 20ου και δυσχυλιοστού από Χριστού γενέσεως. Ο Πρόεδρος του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Φιλοσοφίας Επιστήμης, Αντώνιος Χατζημοϊσής. Ελληνική Δημοκρατία. Πριτανεύοντος εν το Αθήνησιν Εθνικό και Καποδιστριακό Πανεπιστημίο Γερασίμου Σιάσου, καθηγητού της Καρδιολογίας, Μοριακής Καρδιολογίας, εν τη των Επιστημών της Υγείας Σχολή. Κοσμητεύοντος εν τη των Θετικών Επιστημών Σχολή Αριστίδου Παρμακέλη, καθηγητού της Οικολογίας και Βιοποικιλότητος Χερσαίων Οικοσυστημάτων και προεδρεύοντος εν το Τμήμα της Ιστορίας και Φιλοσοφίας της Επιστήμης Αντωνίου Χατζημοϊσή, καθηγητού της Συγχρόνου Φιλοσοφίας Μάρτιν Καριέρ, από δόγματος ομοθήμου της των Θετικών Επιστημών Σχολής εις τους Επιτίμους Διδάκτορας εγκρίνομεν, Αθήνηση μηνός Μαρτίου 20, έτους 5ου και 20ου και δυσχυλιοστού από Χριστού γεννήσεως. Ο πρίτανης Γεράσιμος Σιάσος, ο κοσμήτορ Αριστίδης Παρμακέλης, ο πρόεδρος του Τμήματος Ιστορίας και Φιλοσοφίας της Επιστήμης, Αντώνιος Χατζημοϊσής. Σας ευχαριστώ.
περιένδυση του τιμωμένου με την τίβαινο της σχολής από τον κοσμήτορα της Σχολής Θετικών Επιστημών, καθηγητή Αριστίδη Παρμακέλη.
Ομιλία του τιμωμένου καθηγητή Μαρτίν Καριέρ με τίτλο Science Under Attack, Dealing with the Failure in Science and with Science Denial.
So I was asked to speak slowly and with some sort of emphasis, and I hope you understand me well. Okay, let's hope so. Yes, let me begin with a few words of thanks. I want to offer my gratitude, and I'm extremely grateful for the honor you conferred upon me. Inatimi mu ka sas efcharisto poli. And it has been a pleasure for me to contribute a tiny amount of scholarship to your master's program in contemporary philosophy and philosophy of science. And I'm overwhelmed by your kind recognition of my work. I feel honored in particular because this distinction comes from the University of Athens. After all, it was here where philosophy was invented. As I learned early on in my formation in philosophy, civilizations predating classical Greece followed recipes and applied mathematical relations, while it is here in Athens that the idea of giving reasons for these recipes and proving such relations came into the world. So in Athens, philosophers established rational argument as a general standard. And the second achievement of classical Greece is the connection of rationality and experience. It is Aristotle who emphasized the systematic study of the phenomena and drew general conclusions. So in this sense, Aristotle created science, and in his posterior analytics, he conceived philosophy of science in addition. So when we look back from the height of our scientific and cultural achievements, we realize that the whole process started here. So this locale is the origin of philosophy of what has come to be called Western culture. When I stand at the excavated Lycion, I feel the early pinnacle of philosophy embodied. It is here where Aristotle's spirit is descending upon me. Walter Benjamin remarked that great works of art spread an aura around them which derives from their authenticity and uniqueness. It makes itself felt at the original place. And indeed, along such lines, the Lycion conjures up a distinctive feeling of awe, a feeling of respect for the disruptive step of intellectual development that humanity took at this place. And this means that the University of Athens is a very special institution for me, and that I couldn't hardly more deeply impressed by your bestowing an honorary degree upon me. My heartfelt thanks to you. So, and I want to continue by saying a few words about the relationship between science and society in our time, and in particular the ambivalence that this relationship exhibits, at least in some parts of the public. Introduction, Science in the Twilight. So, judging from recent polls among the wider public, the former faith in science, the strong trust in the appropriateness and accuracy of scientific findings, has in part given way to a more critical or even negative attitude in the general public. Although science still enjoys a high level of trust in surveys, public opinion is often in doubt when asked about more practically relevant areas of science or about the role of experts. Strong minorities in the European Union assent to the claim that experts have too much power in society as compared to elected representatives of the people. Similarly, when research results become relevant to personal lifestyles, reservations quickly surge. This applies in particular to areas such as health and illness, nutrition, the environment, including climate, of course. The at times limited persuasive power of science can be seen in non-compliance. Many people do not adequately follow medical prescriptions, and they do not adapt their behavior to the threat posed by climate change. So such practical distancing from science-based advice is overlooked by many analysts who only take notice of the general affirmative attitude towards science. And I want to look more closely into the reasons for such behavior and go into three such motivations. This lack of credibility, this partial, I should emphasize, lack of credibility is partly due to fears that practice-driven research is biased and too closely intertwined with business and politics. And the second problem is the incentive system of science, which may put speed before thoroughness. And the third manifestation of the credibility crisis is the rise of the populist denial of science. And this scene includes rebels at many fronts, including vaccination, climate, and it often relies on conspiracy theories. And I want to say a few words about such movements and develop strategies, sketch strategies for dealing with such movements. So, lack of reliability and relevance of research. So a major reservation that comes up in the surveys mentioned is the suspicion among parts of the public that science is closely intertwined with social powers, such as business and politics. So some people believe that biomedicine is a paragon of the intrusion of partial social interests in research. So the assumption is that the research agenda is shaped by the interest to make money and not to cure people. Pharmaceutical research is presumed to be geared towards patentable products, which means that certain questions are not asked at all. Industry is not keen on finding out the benefit of workout and vegetables, and this may result in an unbalanced and incomplete picture. This problem is perceived among some people, not the majority, but a sizable minority. This problem can be framed such that practice-driven research in biomedicine lacks relevance. It fails to address the problems that are actually urgent in society. And a kindred problem is inadequacy in scientific testing. This fear is often articulated by academic critics of practice-driven research. The reproach is that such research is constrained by tight time frames and cannot afford to check its results thoroughly. So as a result, in the perception of parts of the public, the intrusion of social forces tends to reduce the relevance and reliability of science and thereby undermines its credibility. A challenge arising for the trustworthiness of university research is the so-called replication crisis, which is thought to arise from incompetence, negligence, and fraud. This problem is particularly pronounced in social psychology and biomedicine, where seemingly established elements of scientific knowledge have not stood up to scrutiny. The conventional narrative of the commercialization of research assumed that public university research is careful and trustworthy. But this judgment has been shaken over the last decade. Researchers in the pharmaceutical industry have complained about the lack of reliability in university studies. Biomedical companies routinely try to put the results of basic university research to practical use. And for this purpose, they use findings that have been published in medical journals, but they see that their attempts fail to an unexpected and disquieting amount. So many findings have turned out to be not to be reproducible. And the usual explanation is that university careers require publications in high-impact journals, and whether the results withstand the strain of practice is of less concern. So the incentive system for professional success in basic research favors spectacular results that have appeared in important venues. So these examples are intended to illustrate that parts of scientific research, and I always emphasize parts, this is only a sort of minority, but sizable minority. Parts of scientific research suffer from a reliability gap. This arises partly from the commercialization and politicization of research. This is the traditional narrative, the accepted narrative. But also partly from the incentive system of academic research. The problem concerns premature judgment and lack of rigorous testing, and it undermines the superiority of the scientific claim to knowledge. However, this picture needs to be rectified by emphasizing that the large majority of findings is not affected by such weaknesses. It is worth noting that a large number of excellent drugs, we speak of biomedical research, a large number of excellent drugs have emerged from privately funded research. innovative vaccines against SARS-CoV-2 in particular originate from such research, while state-funded research, as in Russia and in China, has produced more traditional and less effective substances. Still, institutional adjustments are worth pondering. Chief among them is a more long-term perspective for use-driven, application-driven projects and the overhaul of the professional recognition system in science. So such consideration suggests that the practice of research is not ideal. If science has come under attack in recent years, current research practices are part of the problem, are to be blamed as well. So some kind of skepticism regarding scientific findings may be warranted and may raise the challenge to upgrade research practices. And this means that the justified trust in science on the part of the public should always be vigilant trust that remains attentive to failures and to inadequacies in research. So the public is called upon to stimulate mechanisms of quality control that see to it that the standards of scientific methods are applied and respected. Public demands can instill the need into science to be more trustworthy by pursuing a more balanced research agenda and by adopting tough and challenging methodological standards. Methodological quality control should be able to ensure reliability and relevance and to make science more worthy of public trust. Since we appreciate science, we are called upon to improve it. Populist science denial. In the first part, my intention has been to stress that science should not be defended by pretending that everything is all right in research. On the other hand, when it comes to dealing with populist science denial, science is the innocent victim of attacks mounted for other, mostly political reasons. More specifically, in most of the cases, science denial is not directed primarily against the body of scientific knowledge, but against the political recommendations based on this knowledge. Science deniers feel, and often quite rightly, that science is used to advocate specific political regulations. The fight against climate change and SARS-CoV-2 clearly demonstrates this connection. In the case of climate change, studies have shown that science denial and market fundamentalism are closely linked, particularly in the American context. The perception is that tackling climate change would open the door to political regulation in the economy, thereby bloating government bureaucracy, ultimately destroying the competitiveness of industry and overthrowing the commitment to free markets. And then, as people of that kind reason, in view of such devastating consequences, denying the underlying facts is the milder option. And a similar link has been diagnosed for SARS-CoV-2. Various science-based recommendations have suggested that the state of knowledge sort of entails specific political measure, and politicians referred to science when dealing with the virus and advertised regulations such as lockdowns and compulsory masks and vaccination as consequences of the state of knowledge. So no alternatives were admitted or discussed, which means that opponents to such policies could only make themselves heard by attacking the underlying knowledge base. Opposition to a policy is thus ultimately expressed as a rejection of the scientific consensus. However, there is no unambiguous transition from scientific knowledge to political recommendation, as my dear friend Chrysostomos just explained painstakingly. In any case, political values are needed in addition. So regarding the fight against SARS-CoV-2, the well-known triad of such values consists of the preservation of health, the upholding of economic strength, and the protection of psychological well-being. And these values can be compared and weighed up in different ways, leading to different policy recommendations in each case. Therefore, the inference relation between science and politics does not exist in the assumed sense, and this deprives science denial of its goal. It is inappropriate to attack science in order to oppose a particular policy. So political opposition can and should argue politically. In a different way, science denial is dressed up as embodying scientific criticism and skepticism, as representing a reenacted Galileo in his opposition against established but unsubstantiated accounts. The non-standard views advocated by such critics are often buttressed by constructing conspiracy theories. In such accounts, a few key figures join forces behind the scenes and deceive the public. The state of affairs is claimed to be concocted by the hidden influence of a group of malicious actors. Most of these narratives are completely imaginary and made up of thin air. Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway's Merchants of Doubt formed a conspiracy to deliberately obscure the truth. And a chief characteristic of conspiracy thinking is the failure to draw comparisons between different explanations. For example, the assumption of a conspiracy must prevail against the null hypothesis of the usual mixture of human miscalculation, accidental distortion, and unintended side effects. Therefore, conspiracy theories need to argue that the phenomena in question do not arise from the natural effects and the natural shortcomings of all human striving. Instead, conspiracy theories start with the hypothesis of conspiracy and then look for confirming reasons. And the lesson drawn from Karl Popper is that those who actively seek confirmation will always find it. It is this failure to compare alternative explanation, it is this failure that thwarts the claim of science denier to follow the scientific spirit of organized skepticism. This scientific spirit of organized skepticism assesses the comparative virtue of alternative approaches. And this implies that organized scientific skepticism is also applied to itself. It anticipates that the opposite view might also be correct after all. Science denial, in contrast, unchangingly holds on to the views established for political reasons. Science denial is completely sure of its cause and thus loses one of the central virtues of scientific thinking, namely the ability to revise and self-correct previous views. For this reason, science denier falls short of pursuing scientific skepticism. In order to qualify as practicing this scientific skepticism, they would need to extend their critical questions to their own approach as well. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I skipped this. Science communication, science and the public. The follow-up question is, how to deal with science denial. On the one hand, it is necessary to engage argumentatively with it. On the other hand, it is clear that hardcore deniers cannot be shaken in their beliefs. The strategy is to argue with the hardcore figures, but to target the bystanders and to seek to discredit the central figures in the eyes of the public. The lack of support by the facts and the fallacy employed should be demonstrated in public discourse. What should be avoided in dealing with science denial is embellishing and window dressing actual practices in science. Flawed, one-sided, superficial reasoning is part of research practice, and claim to the effect that science establishes nothing but the facts are not convincing. Of course, partisan social interests shape the views of science deniers, and the classic case is climate change deniers who want to drive their SUV with a clear conscience. However, the commercialization and politicization of science suggests that pure interest in knowledge is rare on the scientific side as well. Studies have shown that teaching deniers the scientific state of knowledge has no effect. Preaching superior knowledge from a higher ground is bound to produce further distance. Instead, the road to take is internal criticism. Inquire into the belief system in question, proceed from one of the premises given, and seek to elaborate some incoherence or reveal unsupported assumptions. The Enlightenment critique of religion contains examples of such subversive internal criticism. Christian Thomasius argued against the existence of witches in the early 18th century by pointing out that Christian belief denied the physical nature of the devil, and this belief contradicted the assumption that sexual acts had been performed between the devil and women. Such internal criticism successfully undermined the belief in witches. The inconsistencies to be exposed include the lack of factual support for denialist claims, while at the same time demanding empirical evidence for scientific results. Accordingly, science denial may be undermined by demanding evidence for the outlandish conspiracy theories used. As a rule, such theories remain completely unsubstantiated empirically or may have even been refuted. An additional track in countering science denial is presenting examples of the scientific method. Demonstrating the process of gaining knowledge can be expected to strengthen the appreciation of the results of this process. Examples of relevant strategies are critical testing, controlled experiments, cross-checking, and outstanding explanatory successes. Elaborating relevant cases should make it plausible that scientific methods can endow hypotheses with high credibility. For example, Isaac Newton discovered that the prism splits white light into a spectrum of colors and assumed that this white light consists of the individual colors. However, the objection was that the prism might as well create these colors from the white light and not lay open what was hidden in the light. And Newton tested this counter hypothesis by blocking out all but one color from the spectrum and allowing this monochromatic light to fall on another prism. It was observed that no further color splitting occurred under these circumstances. So this ingenious cross-check undermined the hypothesis of the production of colors and confirmed Newton's assumption of the splitting of light. So such examples persuasively show that and how scientific methods endow certain hypotheses with superior trustworthiness. In the same vein, demonstrating the painstaking scientific scrutiny in evaluating causal hypotheses should undermine denial. It is part of conventional wisdom in science that methodological fallacies like post hoc ergo propter hoc should be avoided, and the usual path taken is invoking Mill's methods of induction. If other things being equal, adding or removing one particular factor changes in the outcome, a causal relation is likely to obtain. So this scheme is employed in randomized controlled trials and is considered the gold standard of causal judgment. So such examples show that scientific methods are powerful instruments and should be suitable to shake denialist convictions. At a different level, it is the characteristics of theories that have gone through such severe testing that attest to their truth-likeness. Take the example of the prediction of novel facts, that is the theory-based expectation of previously unobserved phenomena. In the middle of the 19th century, James Maxwell formulated a comprehensive theory of electromagnetism, which was intended to capture electrical and magnetic interactions. Maxwell noticed that it followed from this theory that a new phenomenon should exist, namely electromagnetic waves. And Heinrich Hertz succeeded in experimentally confirming this prediction in the 1880s. So the successful prediction of such unanticipated and surprising effects is a sign of excellence and truth-likeness of the corresponding theory. So such examples of the use of scientific methods make the fascination of seeking knowledge palpable through the vivid participation in or concrete understanding of the adventure of research. Their comprehension could make the public understand how hypotheses can be supported empirically in outstanding measure. And I think that such insights could increase the persuasive power of science in the public eye. So the conclusion is that the defense of science against its detractors should start with a realistic picture of science, should not whitewash the weaknesses of the research process. The defense of science is strengthened by the improvement of science. Institutional arrangements to channel economic and political influences on science, as well as the overall of the professional incentive system, can upgrade the reliability of scientific findings. Science denial should be undermined primarily by internal criticism of the lack of coherence or empirical support on the part of denialist views, and the communication of knowledge should illuminate sophisticated methods employed in research and thereby make the fascination of deciphering nature tangible. Thank you for your attention.
Πέρας της εκδηλώσεως. Σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ για την παρουσία σας.